Hello and welcome to That Encyclopedia Podcast with your hosts, myself, Will, and Jacob.
Hello.
Today, it feels like a bit of deja vu. It feels like we've been there before. We've had an episode where we've talked about one of the world's most popular beverages. Do you remember we talked about tea?
I do recall this, yeah.
I can't remember what episode that was. That was about maybe that was episode 16, maybe 10 episodes ago, something like that. Well, today is not that different. We're talking about a popular beverage, again, one of the most popular beverages in the world, although this time it's a little bit more synthesized, but originally was made using leaves. Not the same leaves as tea, mind you. We're talking about Coca-Cola. And as many of you may know, Coca-Cola was originally made using coca leaves, so essentially had cocaine as an active ingredient, and cola nuts, which are a rich source of caffeine. So that's the topic for today. So it's a brand, it's a drink, it's a very big company.
And I think you'd agree, Will, as an aspiring doctor, that this is a significantly less healthy drink for you than tea is.
Probably. Although I'd say the health concerns I have with the drink have diminished significantly over the iterations of its recipe from past through to present. Of course, nowadays we can even get caffeine-free and sugar-free Coca-Cola varieties, whereas, yes, as I said, the original form has an interesting origin, really. The recipe was devised in the 19th century by this man called John Pemberton, who was a Confederate colonel, and he had an addiction to morphine because he had been wounded during the American Civil War. Luckily for this Colonel John Pemberton, he had a medical degree, hooray, and so he knew that morphine was a little bit problematic to be addicted to. So he had the marvellous idea of trying to come up with some other concoction to be addicted to instead. And so he landed on a cocaine-inspired drink.
So Coca-Cola helped combat, if not outright solve, his addiction to morphine?
Well, I'm not sure how well it worked. I've not gone too deep into his own biography to see whether it came back as a problem. But it was, well, we know of it today. It became a successful drink, and it was for a time. Well, it was initially marketed as a proprietary medicine, an over-the-counter medicine, and Pemberton claimed that it had a lot of health benefits, that it cured certain diseases, that it cured morphine addiction for one, but also indigestion, nerve disorders, headaches, impotence. But I think where it really connected with a wider market was this idea that Coca-Cola could be a temperance drink, meaning that it's a drink that can be enjoyed by the social movement for those wanting to abstain from consumption of alcoholic beverages.
I mean, I admit it's my go-to drink still today in the 21st century if I am socializing with friends, say, and it's past midday, but I am not in the mood to consume alcohol. I don't drink very much alcohol at all, really, and I normally default to some sort of soft drink, fizzy drink, and it's normally Coke. So over 100 years later, not much has changed.
See, that's exactly what I was thinking. I feel like that place for the drink was actually perfect because it really is a lot of people's go-to non-alcoholic. You know, you're going for a pub lunch and you're like, should I have a pint? Should I not have a pint? And it's either a pint of beer or it's a pint of Coca-Cola. So it's still...
This is the thing. It's so ubiquitous that it's sold in literally every country on the planet bar two. It's not sold in Cuba, and it's not sold in North Korea, as you may have been able to guess. But that still leaves, 200 odd countries where you are guaranteed, if nothing else, to be able to find and purchase a can or a bottle of Coca-Cola. It's one of the most commercially successful beverages of all time, if not the most commercially successful, given that the other drinks that people consume more often, like water, tea, and coffee, are not sort of patented inherently in the same way that Coke is. Coke is made with a formula that is a closely guarded trade secret, and in fact, in some places, you'll come across bottles of cola without the Coca at the front, and these so-called cola drinks are attempts to emulate, recreate, or otherwise imitate the original Coca-Cola formula. However, none, at least in my experience, has really been successful in perfectly matching the taste of Coca-Cola. Although that said, many of them are very nice in their own right. A lot of kind of homemade, like local branded colas are lovely. And of course, there is the elephant in the room, Pepsi, which some people claim tastes even better than Coke. Do you have a position on this particular debate, Will? Are you more of a Pepsi enjoyer?
Yeah, I'd say I have a position. My position is that, okay, Pepsi has its place. You know where I like Pepsi? I like Pepsi if I'm... You know what, I'm changing my mind as I'm beginning to make this argument. I'm being too charitable. No, Coke is just better than Pepsi. Sorry, Pepsi is just generally slightly oversweetened. Pepsi's great and all, but if you want to drink to excess, Coca-Cola is your boy.
I'm not sure that I agree. I enjoy both drinks, but I normally default to Pepsi. But as I'm speaking, I realise I actually normally default to Pepsi Max, which is a variant of Pepsi's brand portfolio. And this segues us quite coincidentally, yet nicely, into something that I wanted to discuss concerning the brand of Coke. And that's the sheer volume of variants that the Coca-Cola company has produced over the years. For example, some listeners may be old enough to remember when the Coca-Cola company decided to change and shake up its formula and introduced a product that they called New Coke. And they introduced this in April 1985. Testing had demonstrated to the company's satisfaction that people actually preferred the taste of New Coke in isolation over not only the original Coca-Cola formula, but also the biggest competitor to Coke, Pepsi. However, when the company released it commercially, it experienced quite a backlash from people who didn't want an established drink to change, even if in testing they had reported that it changed for the better as far as their taste buds were concerned. The nostalgia trumped the, if you like, objective preference that they would have. Obviously subjective, but objective to them as an individual. They tried renaming it to Coca-Cola 2 and sold it in parallel with the original Coke, which they called Coke Classic, but ultimately it was discontinued in 2002, so it lasted about 17 years. until in 2019 they actually reintroduced New Coke, I think in a limited capacity to promote the third season of the Netflix original Stranger Things, which largely takes place in the 80s. So it's almost come full circle, and now people, or at least the Coca-Cola company, felt that they would capitalize on people's nostalgia for a drink that was rejected because people were nostalgic for the original drink. So it's this really layered series of events, and that's just one variant of the original Coke, but I'm sure people are also familiar with like Coca-Cola Cherry, Coke Gold, or at least these names might vary by country, but here in the UK we have Coke Gold, which I think is caffeine free. We have the original, we have Coke Vanilla, we have Coca-Cola Lime, Raspberry, and others that I have never even heard of. The most recent one, according to the article, is Coca-Cola Marshmallow, a strawberry and watermelon flavour mix made in collaboration with marshmallow. But I personally have never come across this particular brand variant.
If I could chip in there, that is where I'm most disappointed with my life.
Yeah?
There are so many, and it's not just for Coke, it's for other fizzy drinks as well, the portfolio of flavours that I would love to dip in and around, but for some reason the stock in most locations is extremely limited. There are lots of fairly straightforward Coke variants that are actually a little hard to find. Nowadays, at least, Coke Zero has become super prevalent, because I don't know why I'd ever drink Coke with sugar in unless I just hate my teeth and want to gain weight. But Coke Zero tastes the same. So, and it's thanks to the sugar tax in this country, Coke Zero is in fact cheaper. So yeah, you get that, but there's so many types of Coke, and I want to be able to like try different flavors when I go and pick one up, but I'm kind of limited to what's on offer, which is just regular old. I really go on.
Well, I was just going to say that the company is so successful that it can literally release variants and not tell you anything meaningful about what makes it different from the others, and still be a commercial success. I mean, there's this variant called Coca-Cola Starlight,
yes,
in the US, but in the UK it was released as Coca-Cola Intergalactic.
I was
right?
going to mention
the
description is my favourite for that. Like, this is on Wikipedia as well. It's like people could have tasted this and got some sort of information from tasting it before writing about it on Wikipedia, but it's just described as Coca-Cola with a mysterious space-inspired flavour. Mysterious flavour.
The page for Starlight says that it's inspired by space. like what does that mean? It does admittedly say on the Wikipedia article for Coca-Cola Starlight that food reviewers described its taste as kind of combinations of fruit, vanilla, and cotton candy, like marshmallow, which I guess is more helpful, but you shouldn't have to go to a food reviewer to figure out what your product is meant to taste like. But you can kind of get away with it if you're as big as Coca-Cola, because its branding and advertising over the years has been first rate. They've partnered with so many different things. They had a run in the UK where they would partner with I say partner with, but they would use the image of Father Christmas and Santa Claus around
partnered with
December.
Santa.
Yeah, not spoilers about Santa's existence, but yeah, they would partner with Santa in quotes, because obviously Santa is associated with red, bright red, just like Coke is, so the branding harmonizes really well. They do music collaborations more often than other companies. The one that I am familiar with is when they did a campaign called Taste the Feeling. And I think Taste the Feeling is a song that doesn't have anything to do with Coke, but then they commissioned Avicii, the EDM artist, when he was still alive, to do like a remix of Taste the Feeling, which involved the line, like, what was it, like, pop another Coke or something. Like it's integrated into music quite well for a corporate brand. Yeah, have you noticed any particularly effective advertisements for Coke over the years, Will?
I don't know. I mean, going back to their classic collab with the Big Pappy, Big Father Christmas, that one, although I read some interesting critique of it, I don't really think it stands. It's clearly much to the joy of the Coca-Cola executives. It's reached pretty much an iconic status as an ad, and I have to say it's not an advert that annoys me particularly in any way, which I have to say that's the biggest issue I have with advertisements, is normally when you see an advert too many times it becomes irritating. But I think maybe it's this phony nostalgia. You know, it's one of these things, you see the Coke ad and they're still using an ad inspired from, well, before I was born, and so it has this nostalgic feeling, and everyone's heard the idea that they sort of pushed into the mainstream the Father Christmas in red as opposed to the Father Christmas in green. So it's a real cultural sticking point of an ad. I don't know how you can wish for or come up with any better branding or any better marketing campaign than that. So they really enjoy that every Christmas, I'm sure, that excuse to run that ad again.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a little bit tangential, but it's a point that I've been thinking about recently, actually. Like, advertisements, to me, annoy me now, not based on what their content is, per se, but more where I see them. Like, on television, I am familiar with, advertisements every, 20 minutes, half an hour, depending on the channel. And so I just kind of switch off. Like, I accept that they're a part of the TV experience and whatever. But adverts on YouTube annoy me to no end, regardless of what they're like. And over the years, marketing executives, companies, whatever, have attempted numerous different things. They've gone to, kind of a meta approach, like, oh, hey, don't skip this ad. Oh, ad button, why aren't you skippable yet, sort of thing. They've gone with the more traditional mainstream route. They've gone with a condensed 5-second advert to make sure that it's unskippable. None of it makes any difference. They all irritate me, because I remember when YouTube did not have ads. And so that, for me, that nostalgia is an ad-free experience. It's gotten worse to my experience. But for someone who is younger than me, who has experienced a platform like YouTube or any comparable website or location, if they haven't experienced that period of ad-free browsing, then I can actually see that it would be just as accepted, because I don't see a tangible difference really between advertising on television and advertising on something like YouTube, other than I remember when advertising on YouTube didn't happen.
I kind of can sense a bit of a difference between the two, and I'll try and explain it. So when you're watching on TV, right, TV's very different to the model we're shifting towards, the model of, I'm going to select a video and watch it now. TV is like, a lot of TV is passive. It's, I'll just put something on, it's there, and you might have something else that you're doing with it. You might be eating food, you might be going around, whatever. It doesn't really matter. The main thing is that you tune in and you wait for your program to start anyway. I feel like there's a minor but meaningful difference when you're browsing through YouTube and you're like, "Ooh, what do I want to watch? What do I want to watch? I'm going to watch this," and then you click on it, and then you're stuck with like 2 minutes of adverts before it actually starts, or you need to wait around for the skip button. So if you're like doing something, like maybe you're putting on a video or some audio before stepping in the shower, and you've selected that thing that you want, you're either going to have to wait around the 2 minutes once you're in the shower, or you need to wait until you can skip the ads to continue on with your life. So it's like a bit more intrusive because you don't want those ads when you want the video, and you want the video when you click the video.
Okay, yeah, I can see that as an argument for sure. It feels more invasive maybe because it's wherever your phone happens to be, or wherever your device happens to be, whereas the television is kind of locked into one specific part of your house.
And it's literally whenever you want the video is when you get the ad instead, whereas the ads are on a schedule on TV. And also, if you record a program, you can just skip the ads. So
that's true. What I find more acceptable maybe is like companies sponsoring YouTubers to do promotions for their product or service. So when they'll take 60 seconds at the beginning, middle, or end of a video to do some sort of sponsorship, because I know that gives a lot more money to content creators, and at least in theory, the content creator has had the chance to trial the product, to vet it, and has made an active decision to endorse it, whereas YouTube's sort of semi-automatic passive advertisement system is just not as thorough or rigorous. I see like horrific adverts, not just on videos, but browsing on my mobile as well. And obviously you can personally kind of get past them with ad blockers, but nevertheless the core website maintains this this kind of policy. This is a very interesting discussion, but I have found something even more interesting, and perhaps more importantly, directly relevant to Coca-Cola. Maybe we'll pull back on this. Have you seen the section? Here's something that I was not expecting to come up in an article about my preferred carbonated beverage. Colombian death squad allegations. Have you seen this?
I did see that section.
I want to take the time to just like read it verbatim, because this is so this sticks out like a sore thumb, and it comes at the very end of the article. It's the final paragraphs. It reads as follows: in July 2001, the Coca-Cola company was sued over its alleged use of far-right death squads, the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, to kidnap, torture, and kill Colombian bottler workers that were linked with trade union activity. Coca-Cola was sued in a U.S. federal court in Miami by the Colombian Food and Drink Union, Sinaltrinal. The suit alleged that Coca-Cola was indirectly responsible for having contracted with or otherwise directed paramilitary security forces that utilized extreme violence and murdered, tortured, unlawfully detained, or otherwise silenced trade union leaders. This sparked campaigns to boycott Coca-Cola in the UK, US, Germany, Italy, and Australia. Javier Correa, the president of Sinaltrinal, said the campaign aimed to put pressure on Coca-Cola to mitigate the pain and suffering that union members had suffered. They could choose a different verb for that final one there. Speaking from the Coca-Cola company's headquarters in Atlanta, a company spokesperson, Rafael Fernandez Quiros, said Coca-Cola denies any connection to any human rights violations of this type, and added, "We do not own or operate the plants." And this is linked to a main article called Sinaltrinal, which I'm definitely mispronouncing, versus or the Coca-Cola Co. What did this blindside you, or is this maybe a bit more common than we think, or is this completely made up, or what do we think's going on here?
I find this interesting because it raises for me interesting questions around like franchise based like organizations and responsibility, right? So Coca-Cola, as you may not know, because as a listener we haven't actually explained we haven't done a great job of explaining the company side, but Coca-Cola pretty much since the beginning has been a company that creates and distributes a syrup, and there are basically autonomous, independent factories can become Coca-Cola factories and bottle the drink using a franchise sort of system. So they're like they're not owned by Coca-Cola, but they have a contract with Coca-Cola, and they are essentially the producers of the drink that you actually buy. Now, I believe that is of some relevance to this issue, actually, because as they say, Coca-Cola denies any connection. We do not own or operate the plants. That's true. They have some stake in some plants, so they own some shares or something in some of their major manufacturers, but I'm not sure that any of them are in Colombia. So actually, there will be this Coca-Cola plant in Colombia that manufactures the drink under the brand Coca-Cola, but they aren't directly owned by Coca-Cola, and therefore the actual plant is going to be, I mean, I don't know what sort of vetting it's subject to, but almost entirely independent. So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be too surprised if there was some sort of gang-related extremist bullying in Colombia relating to this issue. I wouldn't be surprised if this issue is a legitimate issue. But for me, the interesting thing is like the question of, even if it is true, what is the role of Coca-Cola, the company, in this dispute? Because it sounds like something where whoever's put up the use of the gang is probably far more local to this Colombian bottling plant than the actual company itself, and probably does not work for Coca-Cola. So I don't know, that's where I'm thinking.
I think that's helpful to kind of indicate to people. It raises really interesting questions, actually, from my perspective as a political scientist, of like ethics and logistics, and like is Coca-Cola responsible? Are they accountable? Which are two different things. Like, do they need to be consulted? Do they need to be informed? Do they need to take a stand and say, look, if you can't protect the workers who are making our product, even if it's through you, we're going to withdraw? I'm not sure. I don't have an immediate answer to that, but it certainly is a nice springboard to kind of begin thinking about corporate ethics, for want of a better phrase, because everything is so interconnected at this multi-billion-dollar, or transnational scale, that it becomes very difficult to point the finger at an individual entity to the exclusion of all others. Interesting. Very nice. It may be good to inform people that if you are ever abroad from your home country, you may notice that Coca-Cola tastes a little bit different. And the reason is that this formula that Will mentioned is not identical in every location. It varies based on market research, local ingredients that are available, and what's sort of legal, what's going to be more profitable. For example, due to the sugar tax that we have in the UK, which makes original variants of carbonated sugary drinks more expensive than their sugar-free variants, a lot of the limited edition brandings of Coke, like this Coca-Cola Marshmallow or Coca-Cola Starlight, are released in the UK as sugar-free variants because it makes them cheaper to the consumer, whereas in the US, where there is no equivalent sugar tax, they're released as kind of variants of the original drink rather than Coke Zero. In the US specifically, and also Canada, there is a niche but nevertheless real business for the importing of Mexican Coca-Cola, Mexican Coke, or sometimes called Mexicoke. This is almost identical, same company, it's not some off-brand spin-off. However, the formula for manufacturing Coke in Mexico uses white sugar instead of isoglucose, aka high fructose corn syrup, which is used in the US and possibly Canada as well. And some people will die on the hill claiming that to them sugary drinks made with white sugar proper are better, both in health and in taste, than those made with isoglucose. Although it does say that in kind of blind studies, people can't normally tell the difference. But then again, if you're the kind of person who can, maybe you want to get on board the Mexicoke train, because it is a real phenomenon, and it makes me wonder what the results would be if you lined up a can of Coke from every country in the world that was ostensibly the same and just tasted them all, like wine tasting, but for Coke.
Yeah.
Do you think that could be a profitable venture?
I mean, I think if it was, maybe. It seems like the kind of thing that, Coke's a big company. They might have thought about that, and if that was a viable option already. So I'm gonna presume no, but it's always it's one of those things that you and I are always gonna think with intrigue. Oh, what if we could just have all of these things here and blind taste test them? Because there are a number of products like that, but Coke and Coke variants especially. And I don't know that we ever will.
Well, maybe that will be something for you to think about as we close out this episode of That Encyclopedia Podcast. For I think we are more or less out of time.
We are. If I could just drag you quickly to one minute tangent before we officially close. Can I get you to click on the contour bottle design section of the article? I just want you to reflect on the prototype shape of the Coca-Cola glass bottle, inspired by the gourd-shaped cocoa pod, and how it used to be. That is the reason for the contours.
That's so good.
Have to include a picture of this in our backdrop, but the original design was wider in the middle than it was at the base, and so was not going to be stable on conveyor belts, so it was not practical to manufacture. And for my taste, thankfully so, I prefer the slick and symmetrical final Coca-Cola bottle. It's probably one of the best pieces of glass bottle design that I've seen. Anyway, we'll close it there. Thank you very much for listening.
See you next time.